Hey, it's Sabrina, and we've got a special episode for you today. This year marks the 20th anniversary of New York City's centralized high school admissions process. If you've been through it as a student or a parent, you know it's no joke. Combing through school lists, weighing pros and cons, and ranking your top choices, it can feel like a full-time job. To reflect on this milestone, Fordham Law School's Feerick Center for Social Justice and New York Appleseed recently hosted a day-long conference titled 2 Decades of New York City High School Admissions: Effects, Equity, and Experiences. 3 of our Miseducation interns, Kelsi, Katelyn, and Bernie, spoke on a panel at the conference about the future of high school admissions. Joined by 2 parent advocates, they had an honest and powerful conversation about their experiences navigating the admissions process, the challenges students face in accessing quality schools, and their hopes for the future. With the DOE, or the Department of Education, recently extending this year's high school application deadline because of a technical glitch, the timing of this discussion couldn't be better. Today, we're bringing you a live recording of the panel, What Can We Do Better? Perspectives from Parents and Students. And one last thing, stay tuned. Kelsi, Katelyn, and Bernie have been investigating one of the most pressing issues in education today: chronic absenteeism. They've combed through city data and hit the pavement to visit a school in Queens to understand what it takes to get students to class and to keep them engaged. We'll be dropping this episode soon, so keep an eye out and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss it. The first voice you'll hear is the moderator Naya Berg, Executive Director at New York Appleseed. Here's the panel.
We saved the best for last, though we had a lot of best, I'd say, throughout the most of the day. Welcome to our final panel on what can we do better, perspectives from parents and students, really visioning for the future, but also hearing from those. We thought it was incredibly important to make sure that we close the day with the folks that are directly impacted and affected by the changes in admissions. Without further ado, I would love for folks to be able to introduce themselves. If I will just go down the line, if you can have your name, affiliation, and then either your role or lived experiences that bring you to the panel today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelsi Bowen. I am a reporter with The Bell, and I'm a senior at Bartley College Manhattan, and I applied to high school during the pandemic.
Hi, my name is Bernie Carmona. I also applied to high school during the pandemic, and I'm currently a senior at the Beacon High School in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, and I've been a reporter with The Bell since my sophomore year of high school.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paulette Ha-Healy. I am a proud product of the public school system in New York City. I'm a child of immigrant parents, and I am a woman with a disability raising neurodiverse children with disabilities in this system. My son Lucas attends a District 75 inclusion program, and my daughter Kira is over at the new Design Works School under Urban Assembly in Brooklyn. It's the first new high school built in Brooklyn in over 10 years. So she's one of the guinea pigs in that particular project. But I'm here because I've been pushing for change in special education policy for over 10 years, especially around District 75 students and how they are placed and not enrolled. So Nadia, it was good to see you in person. But we are going to continue that fight, and that's kind of why we're here today.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Melville. I am a senior at the Brooklyn Institute for Liberal Arts, and like Kelsi and Bernie, I applied to high school during the pandemic. I am a student reporter with the Bell's Miseducation podcast, but also I'm the editor-in-chief of my school newspaper, and I specialize in stories about civic engagement in students.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Kaliri Salas Ramirez, she, her, ella. I'm a neuroscientist and a professor at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, but I live in Harlem, and I have 2 New York City public school students. One is an 8th grader, so we're in the middle of the high school application process. And because I love the system so much, I have a kindergartner, so we will be around for a hot minute. I am the former president of the Community Education Council for District 4, and I also served as a Manhattan Borough President appointee to the Panel for Educational Policy until this June for 2.5 years under this administration. Have spent about 10 years doing education advocacy. My oldest also has an IEP since he's been in kindergarten. So for us, it's incredibly important to participate in being in inclusive schools. I will also say before being at Rutgers, I was at the CUNY School of Medicine, which is a BSMD program that CUNY offers, and I was on the admissions committee for 12 years. Looking at New York City public school students and comparing them to other students across New York as well as the country, and really understanding how they transition into not just going into college, but also really thinking about being healthcare practitioners. Have a lot to say about all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. For the first question, I want to connect back to what we had heard at the very beginning of the day. And for folks who are not here, our keynote speaker, bear with me at the end of the day, Dr. Lallinger had posed a question that was really, what is the purpose of school? And so for you, from your perspective, what do students and families value most about their high school experience or your current high school experience? Bernie, I'm wondering if I can turn it over to you first to kick us off with that.
Yeah, well, I think, for me, the high school experience has always been, ups and downs. It's been a really, it's been a wonderful experience, but also an experience where I have to really look at the different ways that my classes are handled or the extracurriculars are handled. But I think throughout all of these years and the interactions I've had with parents and students, I think the most important thing that they value is comfortability and having access to a place that just hears their concerns and takes action and initiative upon them. I think there's always going to be something that students are there's always something that's happening in school, and so there's always different issues that arise at a school. So I think having that proper transparency and just addressing those issues firsthand, sending emails, I think for some schools, sending an email is just so hard because we're just not addressing the heart of the issue, and just being so transparent with that is what I think is really necessary.
Absolutely. Kaliris, I'm wondering if I can turn it over to you for a parent perspective too.
Yeah, I think not just as a parent, but again, as somebody that's in higher education, what I value in the high school experience is for students to become critical thinkers. I don't worry as much about content per se, but I want a student that is able to look at content, determine what the important things are, and to question what those things are. A student that has the ability to challenge themselves, and most of all, a student that has the ability to ask for help. So many of our students struggle in that transition from high school to college and don't know who to go to for help. Don't know who to go to ask if they were a student that had an IEP and needed additional support. How do we get those accommodations? Because it's, God forbid, you're a high school student and you actually have a learning difference. And so someone that feels seen, that feels safe in their own body, that has the opportunity to ask for and advocate for themselves. That has been the hardest thing that I've observed in my classroom. A lot of the students that come, particularly from specialized high schools, are very concerned about what's coming on the test, and are very concerned about what's the number. And I will say, anecdotally, our students at the CUNY School of Medicine that broke honor code and would cheat on exams would be students from specialized high schools. And that would be one of the first things that we would have to address because they're so committed to a particular number. And when you move on to instruction that's less lecture and much more self-directed, like a lot of our consortium schools offer, they don't really know how to engage in that work. So there's a lot of unlearning in that transition. That's the reason why I've chosen progressive schools for both my children, from the level of elementary all the way up now to 8th grade and high school potentially, because I want them to experience what we're talking about at the level of the state, as Tina mentioned, moving away from the Regents exam and doing performance-based assessments, because that's really what supports lifelong learners in the future.
Yes. Elaborating a little bit on that, I have a question that goes past this, what's your idea of the high school experience, but reflecting on your own personal experience, how has the high school admissions process felt? And I think all of you might have said that you went through it during the pandemic, which is fun, I'm sure. But I'm wondering if Kelsi or Katelyn, if you can elaborate on how this process has felt a little bit.
For me, applying to high school during the pandemic was really weird. Having to do everything digitally. I've never taken a test digitally before. Yeah, I feel like my experience was a little bit different because I'm a part of Breakthrough, which is another out of school program, and it really helps students guide them through high school processes and the college process. So having that program and being a part of it, they gave me SHSAT prep, they gave me interview prep, they were showing me or exposing me to a bunch of different high schools that I never even knew of. I didn't know that there was a private high school. I didn't know that there were early college high schools before that program. And having to just make that entire switch to doing applications online and having my first introduction to high school be through a screen was really weird, and it made the transition when I actually started high school a little difficult because I was so used to just only seeing people from the neck up, and when I'm actually interacting with people and I'm seeing how they behave, it was just a little bit of a culture shock.
Yeah, to add on to what Kelsi was saying, when I applied to high school, I was very confused. For middle school, I attended the Scholars Academy, so a lot of my counterparts, they were looking at specialized high schools, they were looking at your Stuyvesants and your Brooklyn Techs, but my parents, they never really cared about prestige. They advised me not to take the SHSAT because they thought it'd be too stressful for me, so I never took it. But I felt really left out because all my closest friends who I've known since elementary school, they were talking about how I want to get into this college, into this early college program, and I want to get into this high school. And the whole time, I'm just kind of looking at schools around me. I'm just kind of looking at schools that would be quote unquote easy to get into. And the whole process seemed very exclusive for students who were looking to go to specialized high schools. It seemed like they had the SHSAT prep. They were kind of a part of these circles that were completely designated to end them in these spots, but it just felt like everyone was invited to this party that I wasn't. And I'm now looking back, I'm glad that I ended up at the high school that I was at, but it made for a really sad experience to watch all my friends go to these quote unquote good high schools, and then where I went, it wasn't looked at as a great high school. And it made me feel really less than.
Mm. Did you have something?
Oh, yeah. Well, adding on to what Katelyn said, I actually felt similarly. My experience was kind of, like Kelsi said, it was kind of crazy, but we had a lot of, we were applying through my schools. This was on the computer, and we had a lot more. We had this new tool that allowed us to look at our career path. I mean, not that we couldn't do that before, but now that we had my schools to really just hone in on what we wanted to do and what schools offered, I think something that really impacted me was just feeling uncertain of what high school I would really get into, because we had to rank from choice 1 to choice 12. And if you were to choose your first choice or choose it as your second, that first choice might not take you as a student. So I think it was just a lot of discussion with your family and a lot of ups and downs and just discovering what you wanted to do in the future while hoping that a school would take you.
Yeah, I think you both speak to a lot of what the messaging and experiences that this process can evoke, and I want to turn it over to Paulette because I also, again, I think that oftentimes it's almost invisible, unjustly so, the students with disabilities and how they have to navigate this process.
Yeah, I mean, my son also had to apply for high school during COVID, and being a District 75 student, it's a system within a system. So for those who are not aware, District 75 is a program within the New York City public school system that services children with multiple disabilities, cognitive disabilities, things of that nature, and they're placed in that program and they're not enrolled. So that is why, for the past 30 years, you will see students with disabilities bust out of their communities more and more often than even 20 years before that. And that is primarily because we heard it from panels throughout the day, that, schools they're confronted with the fact that they just don't have the resources to support children with multiple disabilities or children who need multiple services and things of that nature. So continually, these children are bussed out of their neighborhoods of which they live, and therefore do not have the opportunity to have access to building community as a general education colleague would. So with my son being in a 12 to 1-to-1 special D75 program, navigating the high school admissions process for him was a totally different experience from the students that are on this board. We didn't have access to my schools. I had to actually log into my daughter's my school, who was in middle school at the time, in order to even see where programs were that actually had special education supports, like ACEs, like NEST, like Horizon, like D75 inclusion. And, my son is that small percentage that actually thrived during remote learning. He actually jumped up 3 reading levels during remote learning. So he was actually an incredible candidate to go from a self-contained classroom into a larger inclusive classroom. And it took me almost a week of cold calling schools to find out if they had space in their program in order to finally isolate one program that would actually be conducive to him. And that was his experience. But we were able to actually get him into an incredible school, an incredibly responsive school that actually put out a transition plan for him. And within the first year of going from alternative assessment, he was able to go into standard assessment and take his first Regents in his entire life, and passed it with an 86. So I appreciate Nadia and Anthony being here because they've been great partners at the DOE in terms of really deconstructing what D75 looks like and actually giving parents like myself a chance to choose where our children go to school. And I just appreciate, Christina Foti, who is now the director of DIAL and has been an incredible component, advocate and partner in dismantling all of the segregative structures that have kept special education as a separate but not equal component within New York City public schools. And this year alone, we were able to open programs that were specialized, that were closer to home, so we can actually have our children go to schools in buildings that are in their own neighborhoods, and they can actually start building community with kids that are that live on their block for the first time in a very, very long time. So there's still a lot more that we need to do. And we're still maybe 2 to 3 years away from actually having an enrollment program for, parents who need that specialized programming. But at least we're having the conversation, and we've got partners like Nadia and Anthony who are working towards that, whereas before they wouldn't even take our phone calls. So.
I think you've already transitioned us pretty well into the actions, like what are actionable steps, and you touched upon what are some actions that have happened, but for this panel, I'm wondering what other next steps that you envision, what actions can be taken to ensure that all students, regardless of their socioeconomic background, their race, their ability status, language status, to have a fair opportunity to attend a school of their choice. And I wonder if I can pass it to Kaliris to start us off.
I was giving her the eye. I think the first thing that we need to do is end mayoral control. And that is really important because that would decouple the power of the mayor to make it hyper-political and part of their platform to uphold the systems and structures that continue to perpetuate segregation. And we've seen it in these last couple of years in our New York City public schools, where we made some headway during the de Blasio administration and actually had panel members that were committed to education advocacy and integration of our schools. We shifted completely to continuing to support gifted and talented schools, to continue to push segregation in the specialized high schools. And in fact, we had to continue to fight for contracts to support our affinity districts in high schools, because those were not going to be funded to support high schools that we still have listed on our DOE as some of the most successful high schools across the city, but we weren't going to support the nonprofits that are affiliated to the professional development and to providing those experiences for our students. So it has been incredibly difficult to sit at the table and continue to see these policies dismantled and make our children's education hyper-political based on special interests. So the first thing that we need to do is to eliminate mayoral control and actually have some form of community control and more power to our community education councils that are actually the ones that are serving the people on the ground. We also have to figure out a way that within that system to have more student voice. Our students do participate in the governance structures, they're present, but their vote doesn't count. A lot of the times their voice doesn't count. We have 2 students on the panel for educational policy, and we have panel members that are like, oh, they're just so cute. Making incredibly powerful statements about what's happening in their schools. And we minimize their voice in a very active way, which continues to perpetuate the trauma in terms of how it is that they're engaging with their school communities. So, I mean, I could go on forever, but that's the first thing that we need to do.
Yeah, I can add on to that. I think that removing that mayor control is really necessary because, this is coming from someone that goes to a screen school. Beacon High School is a screen school, and historically, Beacon High School was not once always a screen school. It's been a screen at one point, and it actually started off with majority Latino and Black students. Right. And over time, that population has eventually decreased. And well, now I can't really say that it's necessarily a bad thing. We're starting to progress from that, but I think just having that transparency and addressing that problem, that a school does not have to be unscreened for it to be successful and for it to achieve good things. And I think Khalidis brings up a good point about the consortium schools and involving consortium and PBATs into schools. And Beacon High School is a part of that as well. And we've been integrating these different strategies that help students do their assignments, not in a way where they can memorize it, but in a way where they can look at the real life problems that are impacted by that assignment. It's not only about doing a test, but it's also about learning how you can create change from that.
To add on to what Bernie was saying, I think my biggest grievance with the difference between screened and unscreened schools is the amount of opportunity. So I live in Queens, I live in Springfield Gardens, and though I go to school in Flatbush, whenever I take standardized testing like the SAT or the ACT, I usually go to Long Island. And most recently, I took the ACT at Great Neck South, and just walking into that school, I saw the amount of opportunities. I saw it on the walls, the amount of STEM programs that they had for students, that they had a whole art room, a whole band room, they had whole art studios, and I thought back to my school, and like I said, I love my school, and I'm so happy that I got to go there and experience it, but I do know that we are also lacking opportunity. About 2 years ago, we had a student who passed from gang violence. He was picking up his sister one day, and he was shot in his neighborhood very close to the school. And it wasn't even his fault, but because of the amount of gang violence that was in his neighborhood, he had passed. And it was so sad, and his name was Greg. And Greg, he had such a passion for music. But my school, we don't have a very established music program. We have a band room, but last year we didn't even have a band teacher. It was just there. And I always say, if Greg was in school at that time, and he was in the music room and he was practicing, he would still be alive today. And without access to these opportunities, you can't expect kids to thrive. And when you push students into unscreened high schools because of bad grades or because of their socioeconomic status or because of their race, then you are perpetuating a standard where Black and brown students, or students with disabilities, or English language learners are not able to thrive in the way that they're supposed to. I walked around that school, and as I'm taking my test, I'm seeing programs, and I'm thinking, wow, this person would love this. Like my friends, people I know, from freshmen to seniors, they would absolutely thrive under this. But because my school is unscreened, because my school is seen as one that's not prestigious or that's not accelerated or advanced, we don't get that, and I think that's not fair.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that also very powerful story about the student who had passed. I'm sorry to hear that. Kelsi, I wonder if you have anything to add, or?
Not really. I think
Okay.
it's really
Okay. But I think something you touched on is educational opportunity. And also, Bernie, you had just mentioned this, and we've talked about this a lot today, screened, unscreened, specialized, and how we sort even intuitively. When we hear specialized, screened, we think good school, we think, and then unscreened, not great school. But that is not the case at all. We have, again, 400 high schools, 700 plus programs. So how do we make it clear that there are valuable educational opportunities beyond the specialized high schools, beyond the screened schools?
Can I take that?
Yep.
I think before we go into that discussion, we have to acknowledge that the public school systems that, as it exists right now, is designed to work exactly how it was designed. It's designed to hold a hierarchy for students who through an algorithm is deemed, deserving of resources, of art programs, of enrichment, and everyone else is just going through a level of complacency. We want complacent people to come out of our New York City public school systems because we need them to be workers in everything, in our civic offices, in our government offices, in municipalities, in our fast food developments. And they're not looking for critical thinkers. They're looking for people to just follow instruction. And if we don't address that first and foremost, then everything that we do is going to come from a deficit mindset. It's going to come from, these are the children who deserve the investment, and these are the children that are just going to do whatever they're going to do, and we're just going to push them through the system. And that is why we have such a high illiteracy rate coming out of New York City public schools. That is why we have such high dropout rates. And I say this only because when we have alternative spaces like transfer schools, like our urban assembly schools that we don't talk about enough, that actually prioritize enrolling children who are in economic need, enrolling children of color, enrolling children with disabilities and English language learners, because they provide critical and rigorous programming for students who have interest in music, in art, in medicine, in law, in civil engineering and creative outlets, and no one talks about it because, again, these 10 schools get all the attention and they are deemed as the good schools. We need to think about what a good school actually is. CTE programs, career and technology programs, have gone to the wayside, and we have legions, millions of children graduating out of our systems who don't know how to hold a job, who don't have the basic skills in terms of creating their own budget, how to pay bills, how to apply for an apartment. Whereas if you go into a career in technology, program, they teach you how to do that, along with OSHA training, along with learning about medical billing, along with learning about hospitality and culinary arts. So, the image of what we have as a good school needs to change in order for us to really broaden the scope of what we can actually do to serve our children so that they have an opportunity post high school, whether that's college, whether that is an internship, whether that's trade school, whether that is creating entrepreneurships. Social media is such a huge component in all of our children's lives right now. We need them to be the creators of the new social media platforms. We need them to be the problem solvers of our future, and we can't do that if we continue perpetuating this idea of a good school and a bad school based off of who deserves the enrichment and who is just going to get by.
I think you touch on a lot of things, but one of them I think is like, how can we improve communication and what that communication looks like? I'm wondering, as folks that have been through the process, or Kelsi, if you have anything to add on ways that we could improve the communication about applying to schools or what high schools are out there.
I definitely think like having these schools come and talk to like these middle school students who are applying. Again, circling back to Breakthrough. Breakthrough is a program that does this. Like it'll expose certain high schools that are selective high schools, or not even just selective, but high schools that offer opportunities to these students like that are like based on targeted interests. And these are schools that these students would not know about if it weren't for this program exposing it towards them.
Thank you. Katelyn, or Kaliris, anything to add?
For me, it's also having those transparent conversations with communities about, let's talk more about fit than we do about what's a good school and what's a bad school. And in fact, one of the reasons that I haven't taken my butt to New Jersey is because I haven't found the right high school for my kid, and don't want to move him because he has, again, an IEP and has significant needs, and he's in a school that's supportive of his progression. And I'm not going to compromise that. And so it's incredibly important to not just focus on the SHSAT $17 million contract that's coming up at the PEP next month, and really continue to highlight, again, our affinity districts, as Paulette said. There's no reason why our kids need to move to charter schools to get innovative pedagogical practices. And we just don't do a good job at selling things. Somehow we automatically, as parents, end up getting opted into some mailers that come to our house incessantly. And even though, again, $21 million spent on a contract for advertising for New York City Public Schools, where are we seeing those? Are we reaching our families that have diverse learners? Are we reaching our families that have multilingual learners? For as much as we want to say that we supported our newcomers, Paulette and I would be at resource fairs with over 1,000 families that did not know that their kid could go to a 3K program. So, or Summer Rise. Oh, don't even get me started, Summer Rise. So there's so many things that we have to do to better communicate that. And currently we don't have a deputy chancellor for the Family and Community Engagement Department within the Department of Education. So let's start moving some things, folks.
And to that point about looking for what's fit for a student as opposed to what New York City deems as good, be it extreme, I can 100% say that I don't believe in screen schools at all. And I can say that as a senior now. If you asked 8th grade me that, oh my gosh, I'd be like, what do you mean? I want to go to a good high school with good academics where all the smart people are at. But I wasn't thinking about community. I wasn't thinking about opportunity. I wasn't thinking about extracurriculars. I was thinking about prestige. And I feel like societally, we have this notion that for light to exist, there must be dark. And for good to exist, there must be bad. Mm-hmm. But when you only focus on that good and that good and that light becomes normal. And it's the same thing with the quote unquote good screen schools and bad unscreened schools. The only difference between that is that they are not good and bad. And when we make unscreened schools that normal, then we will reap the benefits of that. We'll see people choosing schools based on opportunity, based on equity, based on wellness, based on extracurriculars, based on culture, based on safety. And then you're gonna see students thrive. You're gonna see students who are not at competition with each other, but students who wanna form community with each other, and students who just want to learn. I think that's the true meaning of school, is to learn. And not to learn, it's not to learn like, calculus and science. And I mean, it is, right? But I think truly it's to learn that as students and as people, we have no bounds. As people, we can do whatever we want regardless of our socioeconomic status, regardless of our race, regardless of our gender, regardless if we have a disability or we don't know English. And that's why I keep affirming that I love my school so much, because even though it wasn't a screened school, and even though it wasn't put at the top of my list because it had the best academics or because it was screened, I think that school showed me that I could do whatever I want with my life. I came into school thinking that I want to be an English teacher, that my whole life, that was it. But now I'm applying to schools under a civil engineering degree. And it took those teachers, it took that community, it took that experience for me to realize that, wait, I don't need to be boxed in. You know, I liked English so much because I thought that's the only thing I was good at. I thought I sucked at math. I thought I wasn't a math person. But then when I got exposed to these teachers, when I got exposed to this school community, I realized, wait, maybe I am a math person. Maybe I'm just a person who enjoys math, who enjoys science, who enjoys history, who enjoys English. And I know now that I can thrive doing whatever I want.
So think about the $100 million contracts that are about to come up to the PEP, and instead of using it for that and advertising and ridiculousness like that, we actually dispersed it amongst the schools in our New York City public school system. Schools like the schools that Chelsea's talking about, you know, schools like the schools that Bernie goes to, and actually put it back into the actual schools that are responsible for generating scholars out of our program. Like, that would actually be so much better spent, creating alternative pathways for our kids, creating job programs to help fill the staff vacancies that we're seeing right now. We need 4,000 teachers right now. We're down 400 paraprofessionals. Did you know that there's a D75 program that actually trains students to become paras, and when they graduate, they get placed in New York City public schools as paras? Like, that is literally taking a population that is being served by these critical positions and giving them the skills to find employment, to come back and help the same community. Like, that's what schools are supposed to look like. And if we actually invested more into programs like that, that actually solve existing problems that we're seeing, that is a much better use of our money than going to SAT prep.
Thank you.
I would like to add on. I feel like, so what Katelyn was saying, if we completely dismantle like this unscreened, screened, and yeah, if we completely dismantle it, I think it would really serve students better, because just hearing the word screened, it's just like something that you were saying earlier, like these terms are doing what they were designed to do. They were designed to make you think, good school, okay, I'm going to go there, because we think of this like pipeline, like if this student goes to this school, then they go get into this college, and then they get into this job. But it's not always that linear. And I don't believe that that school or whatever will give you that opportunity, or like will place you in that pipeline directly. But also, like, if we were to take this money that we're spending on like advertisement, you actually give it to these schools that are unscreened or that are struggling, you're gonna have these kids thrive. And if we select schools not based on like prestige or whatever, like you select it on what you want your child to come out of the school with. You want a school that's gonna guide your kid. You want a school that's gonna make your child feel safe. You want a school that's gonna ensure that your child is going to thrive outside of it. Because it's not just your child is not just a student in these schools. This is where they're going to develop themselves as a person. This is where they're going to develop as a citizen. College is not always an option for everybody. So you have to make sure that these kids are getting this type of nurturing in these high schools. And you can say prestige, but some of these prestigious schools, they spend so much time on education that they don't actually care about the kids. They don't care about student safety. They don't care about how is this child going to thrive and be a productive and aware and educated and mindful person outside of that school. So, yeah.
Thank you. One of the questions that was sort of remaining, and I think we naturally went into a conversation about it, is sort of like improvements and enhancements and innovation for the system. But I want to pause and just give time to ask how we ensure students feel included in this process. I think oftentimes we talk about counselors or adults and parents that are also really navigating this, but also making sure that students feel like they have agency in deciding their choices. I'm wondering if anyone wants to add on to that question.
I can take on that one, yeah.
Okay.
So I think we all touched on like dismantling we all talked about, the importance of dismantling the status quo and really getting rid of the idea of screened and unscreened schools. But I think the idea of students receiving that type of support can include college counseling. It makes me even think back to my current college counseling experience. I think that my college counseling experience now really differs from my 8th grade experience because I didn't receive that much support back then. But seeing all of that support now really makes me realize how much I really would have benefited from it. I have a sister who is a college counselor at Dreamyard Preparatory High School. It's in the Bronx, but she always comes to me every day and just talks about how the students that she interacts with are did not even want to think about the idea of college and are now stepping into these new positions and just taking initiative and wanting to go to college. And I think that if middle schoolers were to have that exact same support and having that same support to really track their career readiness instead of their own rigor and their own academic achievements, I think that idea of choosing what you want to be or choosing your career path is really more important than your prestige at the end of the day. And I think that, well, touching in on, I think Khalid's mentioned some pedagogical strategies. Well, I think that overall, since for the longest time we've really just had I want to say prison abolitionist, but I think that kind of, we've been trying to use that in order to dismantle this system. But I think over the past couple of years, there's been metal detectors in these schools, and there's been different initiatives in place to make these students feel like they're in a prison and not in a school. So I think that we also have to make sure that the staff members are really, certified and prepared to encounter a supportive and inclusive environment instead of, forcing students to be submissive to the system.
I want to add a little bit to that in the sense of like, I actually use, when I would interview students for the CUNY School of Medicine, one of my questions was like, so first of all, what did you find more challenging, choosing a high school or applying to college? And always choosing a high school. Kind of like by the time they would get to that interview, they were like completely ready for it. But when I would ask them, so how did you choose your high school? I would get a range of things from, I disappointed my parents because I didn't get into the specialized high school that they thought I should go to. Now, mind you, the student population at the CUNY School of Medicine, 90% of our students received financial aid. A lot of them come from immigrant families. We are known as the most diverse medical school in the whole country, where 60% of our students are Black and Latino, and it is a mission-driven school. But the fact that these 13 and 14-year-olds were meant to feel like they were less than already in that process, and that their parents were kind of like dictating that value for them was heartbreaking, because then they would question what they were doing in front of me. And these were kids that were getting exceptional grades, valedictorians, killing the SAT, killing the Regents, killing the ACT. And I'm like, excuse me, why are we questioning ourselves right here, right now? And so I think as a parent, for me, that's been a really different conversation for my son. Again, my son has, a lot of people have guessed a lot of things about him. We finally understand. He just got a diagnosis 2 days ago of social anxiety. But it was like, what's going on with him? Big emotions, lots of stuff that would paralyze his performance. And I have always tried to engage him in this process. And right now, even though he's, again, at a great school, as we're talking about high school, he's like, I just want to go to the high school that's co-located in the same building as my little brother, because one, those were my former teachers, and that's where I feel comfortable, but two, I get to be with my little brother, and I get to come back to the neighborhood. The other thing is that distance. He has to commute 30 minutes on his own in the subway to get to school, because mommy has to go to work. Understanding that the adolescent brain may not have the capacity to make decisions. I'm an adolescent neuroscientist, so I can say that, but also giving them the agency to be able to understand what this process is like, I've found that it helps them in terms of that development of those skills to be able to have that decision-making ability. The last thing I will say is that if we're in schools where we're dictating prepackaged curriculum, which is another mandate that we have currently, that does not allow for students to read whole books, and that is limiting their exposure to culturally responsive curriculum, is also incredibly damaging and limits the ability of our students to make these kinds of decisions moving forward. Because doing that in elementary school, pushing that in middle school, once they get to high school, we go back into those boxes.
I want to add on to just giving children agency. I feel like there's always a question about how do we get students more involved, and I feel like my immediate answer is always like, well, let's ask them what they want. You know, it's so simple. Like, they are people too. Let's ask them what they want. And I think one of the best instances of this that I've seen, I attended a high school fair at Mott Hall Middle School in Brownsville, I think about a week or a week and a half ago, and I represented my school with a couple of my friends. And it began with a couple students on a panel, and we all talked about our high schools, and then some schools, I think UA for music, they did a performance, and we had Brooklyn Collegiate, I think they did a step performance. And we just had every student kind of talk about their school and what their school had to offer. And then we transitioned into the gym of the middle school, and there were staff around asking students, okay, so what are you interested in? You're interested in dance? Why don't you check out UA? You're interested in culinary arts? Why don't you check out this one? You're interested in science? Why don't you check out that one? And I just found it so powerful to just ask a middle school student, hey, what do you want to do? And I just saw the way that their faces lit up. They're like, well, what do I want to do? Well, my mom says she wants me to go to XYZ, but I thought Brooklyn Collegiate was really, their step performance was awesome. Or I thought UA was super cool, like that music performance was so awesome. And then these students were able to go to whichever school they wanted, put down their mom and dad's information, put down their parents' information, and have the school contact them for an open house. And it just gave students so much more autonomy in where they want to end up and where they want to be. And I realized a lot of these students, they weren't asking about academics. Like, they asked, oh, is this a good school? And I'm like, well, what's a good school? What's a good school to you? What do you want? What do you want out of your high school experience? And I think we need to do that more.
Thank you. I believe that was everyone got right? Great, awesome. Can I get a round of applause for this panel? Thank you so much.
Miseducation is a program of the Bell. Our work is made possible by generous support from the Pinkerton Foundation, the Summerfield Foundation, FJC, and Hindenburg Systems. Special thanks to Naya Berg and her team at New York Appleseed and to Fordham Law School's Feerick Center for Social Justice. This panel was edited for length and clarity. See you next time.